My name is Eleanor Hayes, and for 50 years I believed I knew everything about the man I married, his favorite breakfast, the way he'd hum while fixing the porch swing, even the sound of his footsteps on our wooden floors. But I didn't know the truth that sat inside his heart all those years. That truth came out one quiet evening, the kind that smells like rain and old memories. The house was still, and the clock in the kitchen ticked louder than usual. My husband, Walter, sat in his worn armchair, his eyes fixed on the fire, his hands trembling slightly. After half a century together, I could tell when something weighed heavy on his soul. But that night it was different. He didn't speak at first. He just stared, like he was seeing something far away, something I couldn't reach. Finally, his voice broke through the silence. "Ellie," he said softly. He hadn't called me that in years. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I should have told you long ago." I smiled. Out of habit, maybe. "You sound serious, Walt. What's going on?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and in that moment I saw the weight of decades in his eyes. I remember the smell of the firewood, the faint sound of wind brushing the curtains. My fingers tightened around the mug of tea I'd been holding. And then he said the words that split something deep inside me. "It's about love, Ellie, the person I've truly loved all my life." My hands went cold. For a moment, I thought he was joking. Walter had a dry humor, and sometimes he'd say strange things just to see my reaction. But his eyes were wet. His mouth trembled. No smile followed. He said he wanted to finally be honest before it was too late. Before it was too late, those words hung in the air like smoke. If you've ever sat beside someone you thought you knew and realized you might not know them at all, then you'll understand that chill I felt that night. But to tell you how I got there, how a young woman from Carolina fell in love with a shy mechanic named Walter Hayes, I need to take you back. Back to a time when our love felt simple, when promises still felt like forever. I was 21 the first time I met him. The year was 1969, and the world was alive with noise, protests, music, dreams. But my world was small, a little diner off Route 5, where I served coffee and pie to men who worked the local garage. Walter wasn't like the others. He was quiet, kind, the type to fix your tire and refuse a tip. One afternoon, he came in covered in grease, hat in hand. "You got any of that peach pie left, ma'am?" he asked, voice gentle, eyes soft. I remember laughing, telling him the last slice was already claimed, though it wasn't. I saved it for him anyway. We started talking. Day by day, pie by pie, smile by smile. He'd sit by the window, always on the same stool. And when he finally asked me out just to walk down to the fairgrounds, I said yes before he finished the sentence. It wasn't a grand romance at first. No diamonds or roses. Just long walks, shared sandwiches, and quiet dreams. He told me he wanted to open his own repair shop. I told him I wanted a home with a porch swing. And, for a while, that was enough. We married in the spring of 1972 under an oak tree behind my parents' farmhouse. My mama cried. My daddy gave him the firmest handshake I've ever seen. And as Walter slipped the ring on my finger, I remember thinking, this is my forever. Years rolled by like seasons. We had our daughter, Clara, in '75, the light of our lives. Walter built the swing I dreamed of. I painted the shutters blue. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Yet looking back now, I can see small cracks forming, the kind only hindsight makes visible. Nights when he'd go quiet for no reason. Letters he said were from old friends, but never showed me. And sometimes, when he thought I wasn't watching, he'd stare at an old photograph he kept tucked in his wallet. At the time, I brushed it off. I trusted him. After all, we were a team. He worked hard, never missed a bill, never raised his voice. What reason did I have to doubt him? But there was something in his silence, a kind of sadness I couldn't name. One winter evening, I asked him, "Walt, are you happy?" He looked up from his paper, smiled faintly, and said, "With you, Ellie, I've got everything I need." I believed him. I wanted to. Now, 50 years later, as he sat across from me, older, frielier, and shaking, those same eyes met mine again, filled with something he couldn't hide anymore. "I don't want to leave this world with lies between us," he whispered. "You deserve the truth." And in that second, my heart pounded like I was 21 again, waiting for him at that diner window. Only this time, I wasn't the hopeful girl anymore. I was a woman who'd lived a lifetime with a man about to shatter everything she thought she knew. "Walter," I said, my voice trembling. "What truth?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked down at his hands, the same ones that had held mine through sickness, storms, and years of routine love. Then a single tear fell on his knuckles. That was when I realized, whatever he was about to tell me, it wasn't small. It wasn't something time could fix. If you've ever built your life around someone, every heartbeat, every plan, and then felt that foundation start to shake, you'll understand the ache in my chest that night. I can still feel the room around me. The faint hum of the old refrigerator, the scent of the rain-soaked wood outside, the firelight flickering against the family photos on the mantel. One of them showed our wedding day. He'd worn his daddy's suit. We were smiling, blissfully unaware of the secrets that would someday crawl between us. And as the clock struck 9, Walter looked at me and said quietly, "Ellie, the person I've always loved, it wasn't who you think." My throat went dry. My heart stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, the edges yellowed with time. When he placed it on the table, my hands began to tremble. I stared down at the picture, and I knew that face. But before I could speak, before I could even breathe, he whispered something that changed everything. "If you've ever loved someone so deeply that their truth could break you, you'll understand what I felt that night. Please stay with me till the end." That was the night I learned that even after 50 years, you can still be a stranger to the one sleeping beside you. And the photo lying on that table, the one he'd carried for half a century, held the face of the person who had truly owned his heart. But I didn't know yet that the truth was far darker than love itself. I didn't sleep that night. The words Henry had said, "Eleanor, there's something you should know about love," echoed through my head like a quiet thunder that refused to fade. He had looked so serious, almost peaceful, when he said it. Then he'd smiled faintly and gone to bed, leaving me standing by the window, heart pounding like a frightened bird. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. 50 years beside this man, through births, funerals, arguments, and laughter. And yet suddenly, I felt like I didn't know him at all. What could he possibly mean by that? The next morning, Henry acted like nothing had happened. He brewed coffee, read the newspaper, even made his usual joke about how burnt my toast always came out. But something in his eyes was gone. The sparkle I'd known since 1973, when we first danced together under a cheap disco light, had dulled. "Henry," I asked cautiously, "what did you mean last night?" He looked up, surprised, then shook his head with a tired smile. "Oh, Eleanor, it was nothing. Just me being sentimental. You know how old men get when they can't sleep." But I didn't believe him. My gut told me he was hiding something, not an affair, not something petty, but something deep, something that had been eating him alive for years. That week, little things started to stand out. I noticed him staring at an old photograph of us with Margaret, my best friend since we were girls. He lingered on that photo too long, his thumb brushing over it absent-mindedly. Once, when I entered the room, he quickly turned the frame face down. Margaret had passed away 5 years ago. Cancer took her fast, before any of us could really say goodbye. She and I had shared everything, recipes, secrets, even maternity dresses when we were pregnant together. Henry had been close to her too, but everyone in our small town was. We were one big, tangled family of memories. Or so I thought. 2 days later, David came by with Lily and our granddaughter, Emma. They were laughing when they walked in, Emma carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked on the way. "Grandma, these are for you," she said, her little face beaming. I knelt down, hugging her tight, breathing in that sweet, sun-drenched smell only children carry. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." Henry smiled from his chair. "Just like your grandma was at your age." I caught the past tense was, and it stung, though I knew he hadn't meant harm. We were all getting older. Our youth now lived in the faces of our children and grandchildren. Later that evening, after everyone left, I was cleaning up the kitchen when I heard Henry's voice from the living room. He was talking softly to himself, I thought, until I realized he was holding that same photo again. "I'm sorry, Margaret," he whispered. "I should have told her long ago." My body froze. The dish slipped from my hands, clattering into the sink. Henry turned sharply. "Eleanor, I didn't see you there." "What are you sorry to Margaret for?" I asked, my voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the silence. He looked at me like a man cornered by his own ghosts. "Please, let's not do this tonight." But I couldn't stop. "No, Henry. You started something, and now I need to know. Did you love her?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then slowly he nodded. My knees went weak. "How long?" "Always," he said softly. "Even before you and I married." Time seemed to split in half at that moment, the life I thought I had, and the one I was actually living. I sank into the chair across from him, clutching the edge like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "You loved her?" "My best friend." He didn't meet my eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen. She and I, we were young, foolish. But she made her choice and I made mine. You were kind, Eleanor. You were safe." Safe. That word burned more than the confession itself. I was safe. I repeated, the taste of it bitter in my mouth. He sighed. "You were my stability. My peace." Margaret was the storm I could never tame. My tears came silent, not sobbing, just steady streams running down as if my body already knew the truth my mind was still fighting. "So all these years," I whispered. "All the anniversaries, the dinners, the love notes, it was all a lie?" He finally looked up, eyes wet and weary. "No, Eleanor. I loved you too, just differently." That word, differently, echoed through the walls of my heart like a cruel echo. I couldn't sleep again that night. I wandered through the house, touching the things we'd built together. The sofa we'd argued over buying, the clock we'd fixed after a storm, the wedding photo that now looked like strangers smiling on borrowed time. At around 3 a.m., I found myself standing in front of an old chest in the attic. It was filled with mementos, letters, photos, trinkets from a lifetime. My fingers brushed against a smaller envelope tucked under a folded quilt. It was yellowed with age, addressed in Margaret's handwriting. "To Henry, in case I never tell you goodbye." My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated only months before her death. "Dear Henry, if you're reading this, it means my time has come. I want you to know I never regretted the love we shared, even when it wasn't ours to keep. You chose the right woman, the one who gave you everything I couldn't. Take care of her, Henry. She loved you truly. Don't let her go without knowing she was the best thing that ever happened to either of us. M." I sat there, staring at the paper, my tears falling so fast they blurred the ink. Margaret had known. She had carried that secret, loved him, and loved me, in her own strange, selfless way. By morning, I couldn't decide what hurt more, that my husband loved my best friend, or that my best friend had loved us both. When Henry woke up, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me. He stopped in the doorway, his face pale. "You found it," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "And I think you owe me the truth. All of it." He sat down slowly, his hands trembling. "There isn't much left to tell. Margaret and I, we were together before I met you. Then she introduced us. She said she wanted you to be happy, that she couldn't give me what I needed. I thought time would make me forget, but it didn't." "Did she know you still loved her after we married?" I asked. He nodded, ashamed. "We never acted on it again. But yes, she knew." I took a long breath, staring at the letter again. The words that had once bound our friendship now felt like chains around my heart. "Henry," I said finally, "for 50 years, I gave you my everything. My youth, my trust, my soul. You could have told me. I would have understood, maybe not then, but someday. He reached across the table, tears in his eyes. I was afraid of losing you. You lost me anyway, I whispered. The days that followed felt hollow. David noticed my quietness, but I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Lily tried to cheer me up with family dinners, but even her warmth couldn't fill the emptiness that now stretched between Henry and me. We were like two ghosts sharing a home, walking through the ruins of a love built on half-truths. Then one afternoon, a knock came at the door. The mailman handed me a small brown package addressed to Henry. No return address. He wasn't home, so I set it aside. But curiosity gnawed at me until I finally opened it. Inside was a tiny box containing an old locket, the same one I remembered Margaret wearing in an old photograph. Inside, two pictures faced each other, one of Henry, young and smiling, and one of me. And behind those photos was a note written in Margaret's faded handwriting. The two people I loved most. Forgive me for loving you both. I pressed the locket to my chest, my heart breaking and healing all at once. But what I didn't know then was that Henry had one more secret left. And it was the one that would change everything. If you think you know what love really means after a lifetime together, don't blink now. What Henry was about to reveal next would rewrite every memory I ever had of our marriage. I don't remember the exact moment my heart began to crack. Maybe it was somewhere between his trembling voice and the way he refused to look me in the eye. But I do remember the silence that followed his words. That silence had a weight of 50 years. Henry had always been a quiet man. When we were young, I used to joke that I could count his daily words on one hand. But that night, that silence felt different. It wasn't the calm, steady kind I knew. It was hollow, like the space left after a song ends. I didn't mean to hurt you, Ellie, he said, his fingers twisting his wedding ring. I can't leave this world with a lie still on my chest. I tried to speak, but my throat burned. My body felt heavy, as if my bones had soaked up the years we'd shared. The dinners, the Christmas mornings, the hospital visits, the laughter, the fights. What lie, Henry? I whispered. Who was she? He looked up then, and I saw something that made me tremble. Not guilt, not fear, but sorrow. The kind that sits deep, like roots in the earth. She's gone, Ellie, he said softly. Long before you and I ever met. Her name was Lillian. The name hung in the air like perfume, faint, distant, but impossible to ignore. I felt dizzy. Gone, I said, confused. You mean she died? He nodded.
Car accident.
We were just 20. She was my first love. We were going to marry. I stared at him, searching for anger, but finding only exhaustion. And all these years, you've been thinking about her? He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the photo wall behind me. Our children, our grandchildren, all those smiles we'd built together. She's the reason I could never say certain things the way you needed me to, he whispered. The reason I hesitated before I love you. I tried, Ellie. God knows I tried. Something inside me broke, not loudly, but quietly, like glass under snow. All my life, I'd believed we were a complete story. Turns out, I was just the chapter after someone else's ending. The next morning, the world looked the same, but I didn't. I still made him oatmeal, still folded his shirts, still listened to the birds outside the kitchen window. But everything had a new edge to it, a bitter hum under every sound. At breakfast, I caught him watching me, and for a moment, I almost softened. He looked so frail, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted his spoon. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. The question didn't deserve a rush. I don't know, I said finally. Maybe I hate the time I'll never get back. He nodded slowly, like he understood that better than I did. That afternoon, I went into the attic, somewhere I hadn't been in years. Dust floated in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. I began opening boxes, looking for something I couldn't name, maybe proof, maybe closure. Then, at the bottom of one old wooden chest, I found a letter. The paper was yellowed, folded carefully, and the handwriting, delicate, flowing, wasn't mine. The envelope read, To my Henry, forever yours, Lillian. My hands trembled as I opened it. If life gives us another chance, promise me you'll live it fully. Don't hide from love again, Henry. Please. For me. The ink had bled slightly from tears long dried. I could almost see her, the woman who'd stolen the part of him I never touched. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the letter apart. But instead, I pressed it against my chest and wept. Not for jealousy, but for everything I'd never been told. That night, I sat beside him while he slept. His breathing was uneven, his face pale. I studied the man who had been my world, and realized how little I had truly known him. I thought of all the times I'd comforted him after bad dreams, all the moments I'd mistaken his silence for peace. Maybe he'd been haunted all along, and I'd been sleeping beside a ghost. Stay with me till the end. What I found next still keeps me awake at night. The following week, the hospital called. Henry had collapsed in the garden. The doctor said it was his heart, years of stress, hidden emotions, and age catching up all at once. I rushed to his bedside. His eyes fluttered open when he heard my voice. "Ellie," he whispered, barely breathing. I took his hand. "Don't speak. Just rest." He smiled weakly. "You were the best thing that ever happened after her, and I never told you enough." Tears blurred my vision. "Then tell me now, Henry, before it's too late." He swallowed hard, his grip tightening. "I loved you in the only way I could. Maybe that wasn't enough, but it was real." And then his hand went still. I sat there for hours, his words echoing in my mind. In the only way I could. Was that love? Or a confession of limitation? All I knew was that somewhere deep down, he had loved me, imperfectly, quietly, but honestly by his measure. I walked out of that hospital not as a widow, but as a woman finally facing the truth. Sometimes love isn't about ownership or exclusivity. It's about endurance. And yet, as I locked the house that night, I couldn't help whispering into the dark, "Was I ever enough, Henry?" The silence didn't answer. But in the corner of our room, the photo of our wedding day seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. That was when I noticed something, a small slip of paper behind the frame. It was another letter, this one in his handwriting. "For Ellie, if you ever find this, know that I loved you differently than I loved her. She was my past. You were my home." My knees gave out. I pressed the note to my heart and sobbed, not for what we lost, but for what was finally understood. And that's when I realized sometimes truth doesn't destroy love. It reveals the shape it always had. I thought grief would come like a storm, loud, chaotic, impossible to ignore. But instead, it came quietly, like fog that slips into your house before dawn and settles over everything you own. The morning after Henry's funeral, I woke up to a silence that didn't feel like peace. His side of the bed was untouched. The indent on his pillow was still there, like his body had simply vanished into air. I reached out my hand and found it cold. For 50 years, that hand had been my anchor. And now I was adrift. Still, there were things to do. Papers to sign. Flowers to send. Faces to greet. People kept telling me, "You are lucky to have such a long marriage." Lucky. The words stung like vinegar on an open wound. They didn't know that luck isn't the same as love. After the last guest left, I stood in the empty house, surrounded by framed memories, a lifetime of smiles that suddenly looked staged. I picked up our wedding photo, the one that always sat on the piano. The note he'd left behind still rested behind the frame. "She was my past. You were my home." I stared at those words until the letters blurred. I didn't know if I wanted to forgive him or curse him, but something inside me refused to rest, an unease I couldn't explain. That's when I decided I needed to know everything. The first step was the safe in Henry's study. He'd always been particular about that little metal box. Said it held old documents and insurance papers. For years, I never questioned it. But now I needed answers, not explanations. His spare keys were gone. But the lock was old, and grief has a way of making you bold. After 3 hours, a screwdriver, and an online tutorial, I heard the click. Inside were yellow folders stacked neatly, a small velvet box, and a sealed envelope. The velvet box held a ring. Not my wedding ring, but a thinner, simpler gold band with a tiny inscription inside. Forever yours, Lillian. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. The ghost of her name had returned. The sealed envelope was addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you everything while I was still alive. I wanted to protect you from the pain I carried. But the truth, it never stays buried forever. Lillian didn't die the way I told you. She didn't die in a car accident. She took her own life, and I was the reason. I gasped, pressing my hand to my mouth. She was pregnant, Ellie. I panicked. I was 20. My parents threatened to cut me off. I begged her to wait, but she thought I was ashamed. She left a letter for me, saying she couldn't bring our child into a world where love had to hide. After she was gone, I spent my whole life pretending I'd buried her in peace. But the truth haunted me every day. You were my redemption, Ellie. I never stopped thanking God for you, but I never forgave myself. The room spun. I sank to the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. All these years, I'd been living beside a man carrying a ghost, not of romance, but of guilt. For a long time, I just sat there, letting the truth wash over me. Then, something fierce rose inside me. Not anger, but resolve. I whispered into the still air, no more lies. Not even from the dead. The next day, I drove to the town archives, a place I hadn't visited since my teaching days. The clerk, a kind young woman named Jessica, helped me dig through the old newspapers. It didn't take long. The headline was there, buried under 50 years of dust. Local woman found dead by riverside. Tragedy, suspected to be suicide. The article mentioned her name, Lillian Carter, age 20, and the address just a few miles from where Henry grew up. As I stared at the brittle paper, I noticed something handwritten in the margin, probably by a reporter. Rumors of a relationship with prominent local family's son, name withheld. I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth, preserved in ink. When I returned home, I placed the article next to Henry's letter. It felt like a conversation between the living and the dead, both speaking truths too late. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Every drop sounded like a heartbeat. For 50 years, I'd built a life around his silence. Now, I could finally see what that silence was hiding. Not betrayal of love, but betrayal of trust. He didn't just hide Lillian from me. He hid the burden that defined his soul. And in a strange way, I pitied him. Because no one, not even Henry, should have to live 50 years chained to a ghost. But justice, I realized, isn't only about exposing the truth. Sometimes, it's about reclaiming your own story from the shadows of someone else's. So, I did something I never thought I would. I found Lillian's old address and wrote a letter, not to her, but to the world that had forgotten her. Her name was Lillian Carter. She loved deeply. She was lost too soon, but she will not be a secret anymore. I sent it to the local newspaper, asking them to publish her story on the anniversary of her death. It wasn't revenge, it was release. For her. For him. For me. 2 weeks later, I received a call. The editor said they'd publish it. It's haunting and beautiful, he said. People should remember her. When the article came out, I sat in the cafe downtown, holding the newspaper in trembling hands. There it was, her face, young and radiant, beside words written by a woman she never met. A few strangers glanced at me, maybe wondering why tears rolled down an old woman's face over her morning coffee. But I smiled through the tears. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living in Henry's shadow. I was living in truth. Later that evening, I went to visit his grave. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and faint lilacs, her favorite flower, I remembered from his letter. I placed one white lily on his grave, and one on the empty spot beside it, for her. Do you see, Henry? I whispered. She's remembered now. Not as your sin, but as her own person. A breeze rustled through the trees, and for a brief moment, I swore I could hear two soft sighs carried in the wind, one of sorrow, one of peace. Don't blink now, what happened next changed everything. Because just as I turned to leave, I noticed someone standing a few rows away, a woman, maybe in her late 40s, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. She looked strangely familiar. She caught my eye, hesitated, then walked toward me. "Excuse me," she said softly. "You're Mrs. Langford, right? Henry's wife." "Yes," I said cautiously. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I think I might be his granddaughter." My breath caught. "Granddaughter?" I repeated. She pulled a photograph from her purse, a young Lillian holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. My grandmother was Lillian Carter. She left a note with my mother before she died. Said the baby's father's name was Henry. My knees weakened. I clutched the edge of the grave marker for balance. The woman reached out gently. I didn't come for money or answers. I just wanted to see who he became. I looked at her, the soft curve of her face, the eyes that mirrored Henry's, and suddenly, everything made sense. The past hadn't just haunted us. It had lived on. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the candle burning between two framed photos, Henry and me, and beside it, Lillian's printed portrait from the paper. The flame flickered, caught between the two, as if it couldn't choose which way to lean. And I whispered into the quiet, maybe justice isn't punishment. Maybe it's truth finding its way home. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace, not because the pain was gone, but because it finally had a name. It's been 3 months since that night when everything changed. The night I found out that the man I had shared 50 years with had loved someone else all along. The house feels quieter now. Not empty, just quieter. Maybe it's because for the first time, I stopped filling the silence with excuses. I stopped trying to understand a man who never truly let me in. I sit by the window each morning with my tea, the same window where I once waited for Thomas to return home from work. Back then, I used to count the headlights, wondering which one was his car. Now, I just watch the sunrise, wondering why I spent so many years waiting for someone who was already gone. When I found those letters, the ones written to Evelyn, his old love, I didn't burn them. I couldn't. My hands shook, but my heart, it felt strangely calm. Every word he wrote was a piece of a puzzle I never asked to solve. "You were my home," he wrote to her, "but duty made me stay." Duty. That's what I was to him, a responsibility, a promise he couldn't break, but one he never fully lived. For weeks after he passed, I couldn't decide what hurt more, his betrayal, or the fact that I had known it deep down all along. There were signs, quiet sighs, faraway stares, the way he never said, "I love you," without looking away. I just pretended not to see. Because when you love someone, sometimes you lie to yourself harder than they ever could. My daughter, Lily, came over last week. She found me reading those letters again. She said, "Mom, why do you torture yourself?" I smiled and said, "I'm not torturing myself, sweetheart. I'm learning who I was. Because now, in the echo of his truth, I've found mine." Do you know what I realized? That I gave my whole life to a man who didn't love me the way I loved him, and still, I have no regrets. Because love, even when it's one-sided, teaches you everything about who you are capable of being. I wasn't his great love story, but I was his great companion. And sometimes, that's a different kind of miracle. I went to his grave last Sunday. I brought 2 roses, one red for love, one white for peace. I laid them down and whispered, "You never chose me, Thomas. But I choose to forgive you." The wind picked up, soft and warm, and for a second, I thought I heard his voice. Maybe it was just the breeze, or maybe, somewhere beyond this world, he finally heard mine. Evelyn passed years before him. Her name was carved next to her husband's. Yes, she had one too. And for a long time, I wondered if she ever thought of Thomas in her final moments. But now, I don't wonder anymore. Some questions don't need answers. Some stories end not with closure, but with peace. Yesterday, I found one last letter, hidden in the drawer of his old desk. It wasn't addressed to her, it was addressed to me. The handwriting was shaky. It said, "Margaret, I don't deserve your kindness. I don't deserve the years you gave me. But if love means standing by someone even when they're flawed, then maybe you loved me more truly than I ever loved anyone. Thank you for my life." I cried, not because of what he wrote, but because I finally understood. He did love me, not the way he loved her, not with fire and passion, but with quiet gratitude. Maybe not the kind of love I dreamed of, but the kind of love that grows out of time and shared silence. So now, when I sit by that window and watch the morning light spill across the floor, I don't think of what I lost. I think of what I found: strength, peace, and a strange, beautiful kind of freedom. I used to think my life was defined by his love, but it turns out it's defined by mine. 50 years. A lifetime of almosts and maybes. But as I close this chapter, I realize something I never did before. Even the love that breaks you still builds you. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it was all for. Because in the end, forgiveness isn't about setting them free. It's about setting yourself free. And as the sun rises one more time, I whisper, not to Thomas, not to Evelyn, but to the girl I once was. You did enough. You were enough. And now, it's time to rest. He never truly loved me, but I learned to love myself, and that was the greatest truth of all.